Alrighty, let's continue with the project. In this video, we are going to implement a character pawn. Um, so what we have now, actually, if I go back to the project, what we have right now is we have our custom pawn, right? We have created a pawn from scratch and added some movement to it. The movement is handled directly inside of the pawn, but the shape and everything. For all intensive purposes, this could be anything. This is a fully custom pawn with fully custom implementation. We don't use anything pre-made, right? So this can be useful depending on the type of game that you want to make. But in our case, we want to make a humanoid character. And as I mentioned in one of the previous videos, Unreal has something that can help us with that. Unreal has a character pawn. So let's start creating a character pawn. So what I'll do now is, again, in my blueprints folder, right click, blueprint class, and let's create a character. And what I'll do is I'll call this BP underscore base character. This is going to be the base class for our character, right? So we can then inherit from this later on. And we're going to open up the base character. And let's have a look what's here. So as you can see, there's already a bunch of stuff in there. The first thing that you'll see is the root is actually a capsule component, right? It's capsule physics, um, which is often used for humanoid characters, right? A good representation to visualize a character. We also see a arrow component. Now the arrow component is a special component that is editor only. So you will not see this in the actual game. This is just a way to visualize a direction within the editor, right? So this is a special type of component. And this is a helper here to know which direction we are facing because we don't have a mesh yet. Then we also have a mesh in there. At the moment, the mesh is not showing anything, right? It's an invisible mesh. So we're not seeing anything. We will fill this in later on. And then finally, we also have a character movement component. And the character movement component will, similar in the way that we just handled pawn movement ourselves in our BP player pawn, will handle the movement of this specific character pawn. Right? As you can see, there's a bunch of options here. General settings for movement, walking, jumping, falling, uh, multiplayer networking, swimming, flying, all those things that are often, part of a character, a humanoid character, are all represented in here. So that's pretty cool. So for now, what I'll do is I'll just close this and we'll set up our player character. So our player character specifically. So with our base character currently created, I want to create a new blueprint that actually inherits from our BP base character. So what I can do now is I can right click on my BP base character and I can create a child blueprint class. So we're going to do that. I'm going to give this the name BP underscore player character. There we go. So if I now open my BP player character, you'll see at the top it says BP base character is my parent class right there. Excellent. And everything is inherited, so that's good. Again, I'm going to close it for now. And what we'll do next is we'll import some files. So let's go ahead, and you should have these files available. I will make them available for you. So I'm gonna move to the location where I have located them. So I'm gonna head over here, west, and you'll find these on Lego. I'm just gonna quickly move to where I have them. There we go, content. It's going to be in a folder called Twin Stick Shooter Content, and it's going to be FP Weapon and Shooter Mannequin. Those are the files that we'll use. So let's import these files. So what I want to do is I'm going to right click on my content folder. I'm going to go to Show in Explorer. So here I can see the same mirrored content. And I'm going to copy, paste these files here, like so. Then we're going to head back, and you'll see that these folders have appeared. I can open them up. I can see there's my mannequin, there's a mesh, and there's a bunch of stuff in there. A small caveat here, I was able to do this because the content that I imported is fully contained within those files, right? The references and the links and all of that stuff is all contained within the files that I provided. You won't always just be able to do this stuff. Usually you will need to import everything and make sure that it goes through the proper import process, by drag and dropping this on here, or just, importing new assets. But in this case, it'll work just fine because of the type of assets and the way they are set up. So with these assets now added to our project, we can actually start fleshing out our player character a little bit. Okay, so let's go back to blueprints, and I'm going to open up my player character. And you'll see that we might be in data only mode. That's because there's no code in there yet, or no changes have been made in there yet. So what I'll do is I'll open the full blueprint editor. All right, so let's go to the viewport, and let's go and select the mesh. And then over here, we'll have a look, and we'll see, well, we have a skeletal mesh. So a skeletal mesh is basically a mesh that has a bone structure that is fully rigged, right? So what I want to do now is I want to replace this skeletal mesh, this placeholder, with our actual mannequin that we imported. So I'm going to replace it with the sk underscore mannequin. I'm going to do that. And there we go. So as you can see, the mannequin has now been added, but it seems a bit off, right? The position isn't correct. It's a bit oddly positioned. The rotation isn't correct. That's fine. We'll just quickly fix that. So what I'll do is I'll select the mesh, and then I'll change my rotation, set this to -90, like so, over the z-axis. And then I'm going to offset the position in the z direction to -78 centimeters. And that should roughly, more or less, line it up nicely with the ground. All right, so let's hit compile. Let's hit save. Close this off. And let's go back to our game mode. And let's go to our player or default pawn class and change it to our BP player character. Right? We're not going to use our old one that we just made. Going to compile and save. We're going to replace it with our new pawn. Again, I'm going to hit play. If I hit Shift F1, then eject, you can see we have our new pawn in place. Cool. Excellent. You could also see that our camera was again positioned at the center position of our pawn. That's not what we want, right? Again, that's something that we want to avoid. So what we'll do is we'll head back to our player character, and we will do our camera setup again, like we did before. So let's go to the viewport, and we're going to add a component. So I'm going to make sure the capsule component is selected, add a component, add a spring arm, if you remember, and then add another component while the spring arm is selected, add a camera. There we go. And we're going to select our spring arm, make some alterations, set it to a length of 800, change the rotation over the y-axis to 50, minus 50, I mean, like so. And we are also going to disable the collision test and disable inherit pitch, yaw, and roll. There we go. So now we again have our camera set up. Compile, save. Let's hit play. Excellent. So that's what we want, right? Now let's see if our input is still working. What? It is. But we haven't added any code yet. Well, it kind of makes sense, right? So what we did in the previous video is we actually, if I go back to my player controller, we've set this up so that our player controller provides movement input to a pawn. So we use the engine architecture and the design of the engine to kind of feed input to the pawn. As a benefit of that, because we are now using a player character, which also makes use of that framework and that architecture, our character movement will actually be processing all the input that we have. So the character movement component will be taking the input and be processing it accordingly. So as an added benefit, we automatically, converted our movement, have everything working. Now, at this point, we're not having any rotation, that kind of stuff. So we'll fix that in the next video. But for now, we have our character up and running.